that warm. It was freezing the other day. Let me see what the temperature is right now. It's 50. It's 50 degrees. So
that's balmy.
Balmy. No, sorry, it's 46.
That's not balmy. That's not balmy.
46. No, 46.
So we are live.
Fireplace weather.
We're live on both platforms. And now, do I need to switch to speaker view to make that happen for everybody? It doesn't matter.
We are live on speaker view. We are all set both on YouTube and Zoom here and are good to go.
Very cool. Are there still people coming in? Should we give it a couple more minutes?
Yes, the numbers are definitely still in flux here. So another 2-3 minutes and then should be good to go.
Okay. How's everybody doing tonight? Amy, these are all our MFA students. They're not all of them, but they are all MFA students, except for Sam, who's a fiction professor with me.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And he's got his camera off. And here comes Christopher Howell, who is the poetry faculty with him.
Sam has a brand new baby.
Yes.
Yes.
Is more reason to have his screen off.
He doesn't want us to see he hasn't slept.
I'm not going to say.
Oh, precious. Woo! Oh, big eyes. Big eyes.
Very nice.
He's supposed to be asleep right now.
Well.
But he's not. Because he wanted to see Amy Tan read.
Well, I have my dog here, and I might have to tell Lou to take the dog with him. Yeah.
You don't mind if the dog photobombs your reading?
Okay. That's all right. Fine. He's here. He's just relaxed, chilled. All right. Yes. Good. You're a good dog.
So, Luke, whenever you say the word, we'll start into the.
Yeah, it's slowing down as far as new people coming in. So I'd say that we are safe to kind of start that introduction process.
Okay, so we'll start the event, and thanks everyone for joining us for this virtual visit with Amy Tan. And I hope at least a few people managed to get some of the fantastic food from the menu that was put together for us by Feast downtown. I know I did, and that chestnut chicken was really, really good. Actually, all of it was good. The Amy Tan, was it an egg roll? The vegan egg roll? Man, that was great. Anyway, so before we get underway, I'm going to introduce you to EWU's Director of Alumni Relations, Lisa Cargill, and she's got a few words to share, and then we'll take it from there.
Good evening. I'm so glad that you're all with us. On behalf of the EW Alumni Association, we're really excited to have lots of alumni with us tonight to see Amy Tan and to take part in the discussion. I want to shine a quick light on a really special alum who helped orchestrate the meal that Greg just talked about. Ross Carper received his master's degree in the creative writing program at Eastern in 2009. He's kind of a local rock star, and Ross is the mastermind behind Feast World Kitchen, which is a new incubator space for refugee and immigrant chefs in Spokane. So hopefully you got in on the limited edition meal tonight, but if you missed out, you can take part in Feast World Kitchen meals each week. So check out their website and stay tuned for more partnerships with the Alumni Association and Ross and his great organization. I also want to just let you know that you can take part in more events like this through the Alumni Association, and here's more stories like Ross's on our website at ewu.edu/alumni, which I'll put in the chat. And if you'd like to support Eastern's creative writing program, you can also do that via a link that I will put in the chat. It makes readings and events like this possible for our students and our alumni and our staff and faculty. So welcome. I can't wait. I'm so glad Amy is with us tonight. And Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm going to do a little introduction and then we'll get underway with the reading. We're so fortunate to have world-renowned author Amy Tan with us tonight for a virtual visit. Amy is the author of The Valley of Amazement, The Joy Luck Club, The Kitchen God's Wife, The 100 Secret Senses, The Bonesetter's Daughter, The Opposite of Fate, Saving Fish from Drowning, and two children's books, The Moon Lady and Sagwa, the Chinese Siamese Cat. She was also co-producer and co-screenwriter of the film version of The Joy Luck Club and librettist for the opera The Bonesetter's Daughter. And while you may know and love her for her writing, I'll also note that per her own website, Amy is the lead rhythm dominatrix, backup singer, and second tambourinist with the infamous Rock Bottom Remainders, a literary garage band whose members include Dave Barry, Stephen King, Barbara Kingsolver, Matt Groening, and others. She's also the occasional ukuleleist with the community of writers formerly known as the Squaw Valley Community of Writers House Band, which often includes yours truly, Sands Hall, Louis B. Jones, Janet Fitch, Mark Childress, Caradwin, my wife who was on screen a second ago, and anyone else who's willing to give it a go. So next month at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival, like we were just talking about before people started coming in, KPJR Films will premiere a new film based around Amy's latest book, the memoir Where the Past Begins, Memory and Imagination, called Amy Tan, Unintended Memoir. We're very excited to see that, and I think the plan tonight is for Amy to read an excerpt from Where the Past Begins and then to take some questions from the audience. I'll kick that off with a few questions, and then if you put up your virtual hand or type a question into the Q&A function that you should see at the bottom of your screen, we will kind of put you in order and try to take your questions. I don't know how many we're actually going to get to, but we'll do what we can. Yeah, so though people around here are probably sick of hearing me say this since we scheduled Amy's event some months ago, Where the Past Begins is truly an astonishing piece of work. Mixed in with essays or chapters of luminous clarity focused on music, art, family history, writing, language, and memory, our old family photos, letters, emails, diary entries, excerpts from unpublished abandoned fiction, and more, making the book as formally innovative as it is intimate, engrossing, generous, and startlingly honest. At its heart, I think, is an exploration and elucidation, not just of Amy's own life and the lives of her mother and grandmother and father and other family members, but a distillation of the process by which all life and lived experience can be transformed into art. It is really an amazing read, and I highly recommend it. So without any further words, here's Amy Tan.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. I need to correct you about my being a ukuleleist. I play air ukulele, and it's really Caradwin who's playing in the back of me, and I'm like this. Like, you know, total acting job, but she makes me sound really good, like I'm a professional.
Shouldn't be giving this away. Shouldn't be giving away the secrets.
But as you can guess, music is a big part of my life, as it is with theirs, and we bond on that as well as in literature. I'm going to read to you a portion of a chapter called Hidden Genius, which my parents always thought all of her children, my mother especially, thought all of her children were hidden geniuses, if only we'd work hard enough to have it not be in hiding. And this one concerns music. At the piano, our mother had fast, magical fingers. She sat erect, and we stood on the sides watching. My father wore a love-struck look as he watched her play. What a talented wife. Her favorite pieces were Chopin etudes, polonaises, and especially the waltzes, which always roused my father to take my mother's hand and lead her to dance. She and my father were stylish dancers, the best on many a wedding dance floor, where they moved sinuously together, my mother turning up her heel when they paused on the upswing, my father dipping her backward as a finale. At home, he would sometimes take her in his arms and twirl her around the living room and down the narrow hallway, humming a tune like the Skater's Waltz. At the end, he would lift her, all 80 pounds, and kiss her on the lips. She would always protest when she saw that her children were watching. Every night, my brothers and I changed into our matching pajamas and joined our mother and father around the piano. She would play the old Christian standards my father loved so much. Onward, Christian soldiers, I come to the garden alone, and the old rugged cross. My father would sing in the forceful voice of a Baptist minister, which he was. Peter, who was 7 at the time, had already learned to read proficiently and knew many words in the hymns. I would draw my finger across the page as if I could read too, although I imagine now that the only words I recognized, if any, were those that were often repeated: God, Jesus Christ, Holy, Lord, Amen. The piano made my mother happy, or at least less prone to sudden storms of anger and unpredictable spells of brooding. That made me think the piano was a very good thing. But then my parents found a piano teacher. Our piano teacher, Miss Towler, was a white-haired, gentle lady with a soft voice and old-fashioned manners. She lived with her mother, who liked to sit smiling in a wicker chair in the sunroom upstairs, where I waited when Peter had his lessons. My mother promised we would love the piano as much as she did. The more you practice, the faster you love. At first, we believed her. The lessons, we were told, were very expensive, $5 a week each for Peter and me. This was yet another sacrifice they were making on our behalf. Our father had to work extra hours to pay for those lessons, and in return, we had to practice an hour a day. Only a terribly selfish child would not agree to do that. 1 hour a day, hardly anything. To adults, an hour a day may fly by before you know it, but for a child in kindergarten, that was the golden hour of after-school playtime, when you could finally shake off the restlessness that accumulated during the school day, then shriek and laugh as much as you liked. The afternoons were also when the greatest entertainment in the world came on, the TV, the Mickey Mouse Club. We could not turn on the TV for the 2 hours when Peter and I were practicing. For 1 hour a day, 365 days a year, I sat on that expensive, hard piano bench, moving my fingers and straining my eyes to read the sheet music. Those lessons changed how my parents saw me. I became a lazy girl because I dawdled as long as possible before sitting down on the bench. I was a bad girl for lying about how much I had practiced. I was a careless girl because I made many mistakes and did not bother to conquer them. I was ungrateful because I did not smile and thank my parents for all they had sacrificed so I could enjoy music. There were many afternoons when I sat idly at the piano and stared out the window, watching my cousins run past, shrieking as they circled the house in a game of tag you're dead. I was a lump of self-pity on that piano bench. Learning to play the piano was not as easy for me as it had been for 5-year-old Mozart. Consider all I had to keep in mind. Count out the time and pay attention to the tempo. A whole note has a big hole in the middle. Tap it out with your foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. Black notes that are linked by ropes move along more quickly. I banged out scales, imagining my fingers were tiny soldiers marching in circles. My piano teacher had taught me that each finger had an assigned number, 1 to 5, the thumb being the number 1 and the pinky being 5. If I did not pay attention to the fingering, I might run out of fingers before I did notes. My fingers ran through the drill, up and down, 1 octave and back, then 2 octaves and back, then 3. Eventually the octaves took on sharps or flats, and my fingers had to do gymnastic feats, twisting under or over each other to play the notes with even pressure and in time with the rhythm imposed by the tyrannical beat of a wooden metronome. My fingers always ached, and I would bend them backward and pull on them, thinking I could stretch them to a length that would enable me to span the big chords without as much pain. How could I ever love something that stole my playtimes, tired my eyes, cramped my fingers, and made my parents yell at me for being a selfish, lazy child? You're smart, my parents said. It should be easy for you. All you have to do is try harder. If Peter can do it, so can you. Even today, I find it mind-boggling that I was supposed to make sense of tiny notes on a sheet of music before I could even read words. My eyes had to dart between clumps of black spots on a page and convert them into finely tuned neuromuscular movements of the right and left hands. I marvel that very young children can play with both hands. Can they write different words simultaneously with their right and left hands? If they were forced to do so for an hour a day, would two-handed writing become a common teachable skill? How is it that very young children can moderate the loudness of their playing according to notations for mezzo piano and mezzo forte and forte? I seldom see kids who can moderate the loudness of their voices at weddings and funerals. And what kid barely out of toddlerhood has had sufficient ceremonial and emotional experiences to play in the mood of a stately largo? Training for our future profession began early. Peter and I were designated as entertainers at family dinners. Whenever guests came to our house, we would hear these dreaded words. Show Uncle and Auntie what you learned. When we visited family friends who also had a piano, we would be pitted against their piano-playing children. Our family friends were Chinese, most of them US born, and with strong ties to the Chinese community. If they spoke Chinese, it was Cantonese, which my father spoke, but not my mother. Many of those friends were members of an investment group they called the Joy Luck Club. They bought shares in stocks each month based on sound analysis. And if all went as planned, they would one day be wealthy. In a similar sense, piano lessons for their kids were an investment for future returns. Our $5 piano lessons would enable us to go from plinkety-plonk family night torture to concert performances at Carnegie. Aim high. Over time, models of success came along and we were told to practice harder so we could be like them. One was Van Cliburn, who beat the Russian pianist and won the Cold War, so went the media hype. Aim high. Later, we had to contend with the little Chinese prodigy, Jenny Tu, who regularly appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, grinning and winking at the camera as she played impossibly fast tunes. See how she loves to play, my mother would say. Why don't you love it too? On piano nights with family friends, all the parents would busk for praise by giving the standard apology. He just learned and is not very good, or she doesn't practice hard enough, which we kids were supposed to prove to be completely false, but failed to do so. All except a boy I will call Charles. He was older than most of us, I would now guess 10 or 11. I recall that his head was shaped like a giant inverted pear, which made his facial features appear comparatively small and pinched. He did not wear a downcast face when seated on the piano bench. He appeared calm, even pleased to be asked to play. He needed no sheet music. His fingers simply burst into action and rippled across the keyboard. His body swayed naturally with the music, and he made no mistakes. Finishing with his hands suspended in midair as the last notes faded and were replaced by enthusiastic applause. We were doomed. After our mediocre performances, our parents would say, "Be like Charles, practice hard." Some adults would give Charles the standard exaggerated words of praise. "Another Mozart." Charles caused turmoil in many families. We were all unwilling would-be prodigies who endured being judged on a sliding scale of better or worse than others, depending on which kids came to those social dinners. I learned the emotions of competition, dread and despair, embarrassment and humiliation, shame and guilt, resentment, even hate, the complex schadenfreude, joy over the discordant failures of others, followed by Christian fear that God knew I was mean in my heart. I hated expectations, the false praise of my parents' friends when I did badly, and I had a hard time accepting even genuine praise from my parents. Praise made me anxious. It was only temporary relief, and it could be snatched away with the next song. At age 6, the world was sorting itself into kids who were winners or losers, smarter or dumber, liked a lot or not at all. Where did I belong? My position was constantly in flux, and there were more ways to fail. Life had become serious, full of worries and feelings of self-pity that I was not allowed to express. Around Christmas, a year after the piano lesson started, Peter and I learned our parents had signed us up to perform in a talent show at church. I received a beautiful new dress and stiff violet chiffon and patent leather shoes, which made me think the talent show might not be so bad. Miss Towler instructed me to smile at the audience before sitting down to play. She taught me how to do a grand curtsy, which I could make after playing throughout the applause. I had to hold my skirt out wide, tap my toe on a flower pattern on the rug, then sweep my leg out clockwise, dip down with eyes facing the floor before looking up with a smile, then gracefully standing upright. I knew the stakes were high, and I practiced my song, a Bach minuet, for the full hour each day. I also practiced the curtsy. Through such rigor, I successfully memorized the piece. It started off in a minor key, which sounded sad to me, but later the key changed to a major mode, which made for a happy ending. So it seemed to me. Before departing for church, I played the piece flawlessly 3 times. I was all set, excited, confident. By the time I arrived at the hall, my parents' nervous assurances that I would do well were making me nervous that I might not. For them, so much was at stake: the sacrifices, pride, good parenting. The auditorium was an enormous, echoing space the size of a basketball court, crammed with hundreds of restless people sitting on squeaky folding chairs. Church members were predominantly white, but there were also about 20 Chinese people and their kids who would also be competing in the talent contest. Actually, it was not billed as a contest, but a talent show, which carried the positive American message that every child was a bright little star who could shine in his or her own galaxy. But I had not been raised in the ideology of American constellations. Each star would be shinier or duller than the others. Only one kid could be the very best, and one would be the very worst, the worst being equivalent to the dumbest and the least liked. I could not be expected to be the very best. After all, I was only 6, and I had been playing the piano for only a year, and many of the kids were older. My goal, as put forth by my parents, was to play better than other kids my age, and perhaps slightly older. Aim high. I sat in the front row with the younger kids and watched each of them take their turn on the stage. I don't recall the feats performed that day, but I'm sure they were the usual heartwarming acts one would have seen at talent shows of that era. Baton twirling, ventriloquism, tap dancing, reciting Hiawatha, singing How Much Is That Doggy in the Window, or playing an instrument like the violin, the song flute, or the piano. I remember my anticipation just before my name was called, the feel of my heart booming at a fast tempo all the way up and into my throat. My mother's hands fidgeted with a wad of tissue. My father politely clapped with equal appreciation of each child's efforts. When it was my turn, I walked in a daze toward an unfamiliar piano, a tall upright that was so unlike our dainty black spinet or the majestic Steinway grand at my piano teacher's home. It was unlike the short blonde or walnut-colored spinets in the homes of family friends. In the past, the height of the bench had been adjusted with cushions or a thick phone book to enable my arms, wrists, and hands to be aligned over the keyboard. The bench I now sat on was too low, which made the keyboard too high. I could not ask anyone to change this. The piano also smelled funny, like the musty closet of a former house that we kids believed was haunted. I did not like the ivory keys. They had yellowed and looked like the bad teeth of old people. When I began, my fingers moved mindlessly, touching the keys by habit. The keys did not feel right. Middle ones had worn in dips, and some keys were stiff and others were loose, like a tooth that was about to fall out. The notes did not come out as I had practiced. The pizzicato notes were too soft and too loud. All at once, my fingers toppled over themselves and stopped. Mistake. The piano and audience were silent. I had already failed. I waggled a finger in search of the right key that would lead me forward. The problem was I had memorized a whole song, start to finish, and not sections that would have allowed me to re-enter at any point. There was no sheet music I could consult. Miss Towler was not sitting next to me to give me hints. I had no choice but to start over. My hands played mechanically, and once again, I was aware that the keys looked like yellow teeth, and the bench was too low, and the notes were too loud, and then too soft. And again, my fingers fell into a tangle in the same spot. I began again, this time pressing hard against the muffled keys as if increased force and loudness could push me through this obstacle course. But now my fingers could not even get past the first two measures. Before I could begin again, I heard soft clapping, which grew into louder applause. This was not praise, but a signal that I was being dismissed and should leave the stage. I ran into a dark hallway, crying and shaking with terror. I had become a completely different girl, the dumbest. People would laugh at me the rest of my life. All the kids would be happy that I had failed. Worst of all, my mother and father would be furious. They would scold me for shaming them, for not practicing hard enough, for wasting their money on lessons. I wanted to disappear the way cartoon characters did. Before I could run off, I saw my mother and father quickly coming toward me. But when they reached me, I saw that they were not angry. They were smiling in a sad way. My mother held out her arms. I ran to her and buried my face into the folds of her skirt and cried hard. After a while, my father lifted me and gently told me that I did not need to cry anymore. That made me cry even harder. A few church members passing by patted my head and told me that trying was what mattered. And then I saw Peter. He stared at me with a solemn face, then looked down, clearly embarrassed for me. I sobbed hard, gulping until my lungs could not take in any more. In this hyperventilated state, as I flailed to breathe, people consoled me. Shh, shh, no need to cry anymore. At my next piano lesson, my teacher had me play the awful piece without looking at the sheet music. My fingers moved according to the new bad habit and were jammed at the same spot. She immediately saw the reason. Incorrect fingering. It was simple to fix with more attention to the fingering. I would be able to play it perfectly the next time. But I knew that was not true. My fingers would betray me again. If not with this piece, then with others, and there would be no next time. I would refuse. If I did not, I would again suffer public humiliation, which at age 6 was one of the worst feelings I had ever experienced. I told my parents I did not want to play the piano anymore. In fact, I declared I would never play again, and they could not make me. Over the next 14 years, I played an hour a day. During that time, the piano bench acquired many scratches and dents. My mother grieved over the first few and blamed us for careless children. That is what I remembered and confirmed recently as true when I read my father's diaries. The bench continued to acquire chips and gouges, more as a result of being jostled from one new home to another. We moved often, and the piano remained the centerpiece in a succession of living rooms. I bore the 60 minutes with the same focus I had in completing homework or washing the dishes, as a chore. My parents continued to believe that one day I would love the piano, but they stopped using the word prodigy. I think they still held hopes I would become a concert pianist, perhaps only as a hobby. Aim high. Over the course of 15 years of lessons, I went through a number of piano teachers, each with the particular tried and true teaching techniques. One woman made me curve my hand over a red apple so that I could play with preformed claws. Another teacher, who was a former conductor, pushed down hard on my right shoulder so I could feel the rhythm that my ear had stubbornly refused to recognize. None of them said I was unusually gifted. My mother had asked. Throughout grade school, I had to perform in piano recitals held in these different piano teachers' homes, with the youngest going first, the oldest last, and me always in the interminable middle, where the comparisons were greatest. As I grew older, I learned that if I expected to do badly, I suffered no stunning blow, and I did. On one occasion, as I neared the end of a long rondo, I realized with surprise that I had played the piece perfectly until my fingers crashed down on the final chord in a different key. In high school, I was the accompanist for the girls' glee, and once froze, unable to start playing. I enjoy being a girl. The music teacher lifted his baton 3 times before he glared at me and commanded me in a terse voice to begin. My mind drifted during my solitary hour of practice. Whenever my mother interrupted me, I shot back, "How can I concentrate when you're talking to me?" I used to imagine I was somewhere else. I saw scenes in my head, and they were shaped by the music. The ominous dark place signaled by the bass register in a minor mode, the full chorded passages that led a royal procession, the pizzicato tiptoe forays into a magical land, the triplets dashing to a ball, a castle, the arms of a cartoon prince. The music was not just backdrop. It created the scenes in my head. I went to forests and meadows, to a place underwater where maidens sang with floating hair. I saw through sidewalks where there were jewels. The scenes were images from fairy tales, but the emotions were mine, and most of them wavered between hope and sadness. During the year my father and brother were dying of cancer, I found refuge in gloomy music. I favored the large funereal mood of Chopin's Prelude number 28, number 4, Opus 28, number 4. It contained a solitary despair and the usual realization that life led to a bad ending. Every 3 or 4 weeks, I would be given a new batch of songs to learn. Some contained emotions that suited me. others felt as mechanical as arithmetic. Before I could perfect them, I had to leave them behind and learn new ones. During my sophomore year in college, I decided to drop my piano course. I was old enough to choose what I wanted to do in life. It had been clear for some time to both my mother and me that I would never be a concert pianist. My decision scared me. I was going to alter what had become part of me, the hated one honed by hard work and the burden of expectations. I had to acknowledge that 15 years of piano lessons, tears, threats, and humiliation had led to nothing, and that, in effect, I had failed. My father had died 3 years before, and I was glad I would not see his disappointment when I made my announcement. I imagined my mother would cry. She would invoke my father's name. When I finally told her, I laid out the reasons I had to stop, that I needed the time to complete required courses, that it took too much study time to go across campus to the practice room, that walking at night was dangerous. She did not become angry as I had expected she would, nor did she heap guilt on me for money wasted on lessons. She said that she had expected that I would one day stop. Instead of relief, I felt a strange sense of loss that I can only now surmise as shock that she had long given up seeing me as being better than I was. She had expected little of my younger brother. She had expected less of me than I had thought. She was sad, I could tell. And she added that she only hoped that one day I would enjoy music. I assured her that I already did. My mother did not live long enough to see how much music would figure into my life. She would have been overjoyed to dress up and go with me to the symphony, to the opera, and perhaps even to a jazz concert. She would have discreetly bragged to people that I had written a libretto for an opera. A true story, she might have said, based on all my difficulties with my daughter. She was awful. She would have been pleased that I had championed young musical genius prodigies who worked hard and loved to play music in front of audiences. To please her, I might have even sat down on occasion at the piano, a Steinway Grand, to play a song I had practiced over and over until I could play it with ease. I would have recalled with her all those terrible times when we argued over whether I had practiced long enough. We would have laughed. I would have told her that music had been freed from my fingers. It would accompany me wherever I went, even into my imagination, into the privacy of my mind and emotions. It was what I shared with others, what we talked about at the end of a concert. I had learned to enjoy music. More than that, I loved it. It had become important in my daily life. Last night I found my nemesis, the Bach Minuet in G minor, which I had tried to play at the talent show when I was 6. It was in a thin, tattered book with yellowed pages, some of which had come loose. First lessons in Bach, the book said, a study in accent and obtaining proper balance of tone. The first piece was the one I had memorized, a simple melody with 2 flats fluctuating between sustained notes and dotted pizzicato ones. When I tried to play it, I was astonished that I had been required to learn this at such a young age. And then I reached the same spot where my fingers tumbled into one another 59 years later and did so again. As then I had used the incorrect fingering, putting the 3rd finger on the black key instead of the 2nd. I attempted to play it correctly, but the childhood memory of that mistake, enforced by terror, made it hard to overcome. I was overly cautious when I reached the notes that I had failed to play. They contained so many emotions. The reason I had hated public performance for many years, the reason I hate being forced at any kind of competition, the reason that I play the piano only when I am alone, the reason why I hate to this day any kind of expectation placed on me, including those having to do with books I am writing. My stomach lurches at the thought of public scrutiny, whether expectations were met. I play the minuet for hours, trying to overcome an old habit and ingrain a new one. I went into memories of church hall and to echoing sounds of applause, its odd-smelling piano, the cold folding chairs, the short bench, the loose-toothed ivory, the missing sheet music, all that kept me from moving forward. I eventually played it perfectly, again and again, until it was 2 a.m. and my fingers ached. I had overcome the mistake and changed the habit. I remembered the folds of my mother's skirt when I had hidden my face and had sobbed because I had failed, and sobbed even harder when I realized I had already been forgiven. So I still only play for myself.
That is such a great piece. So, I mean, one of the things that really took me by surprise when I was reading your book was learning how much music was involved in sort of inspiring narrative for you, and that you hear stories in music. And, until then I thought, like, I'm the only one who listens to, like, the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto and here's a story in there. So that's just really cool. And I'm curious to hear you talk more about that. And also I'm wondering, as you're reading this, like, I mean, the burden of those lessons and the way it just messed you up is really so fascinating. But I also wonder, like, would the way music informs your work now, do you suppose that if you hadn't played the piano for those 14 tortured years, that it would have as much impact still for you?
I would have been an egomaniac. I would have thought everything I did was perfect. No, I'm joking. It's very hard. I've never been able to say, well, what if this had not happened, or if I had a different mother, whatever. Everything that's happened in my life is what shaped me, who I am. And so I would not change anything. I can't sort out what kind of a different person I would have become. Would I have become more confident? I don't know. I did end up loving music, but I think what became ingrained in me, despite what I felt about the piano early on, was the sense of story. Now, unlike you, I thought everybody saw stories when they listened to music. And I remember being at a concert, listening to the symphony, and then turning to the person I was next to, and I said, what story did you hear with that? And the person just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And that's when I realized that not everybody saw these stories. They didn't evoke stories. And I thought, how could that be? Because it's so full of emotion, and emotions are stories. I mean, you don't have emotions by themselves. So that was a revelation. The other part of it, I remember in the early lessons, a teacher talking to me, especially when it came to sonatas or concertos, that you have movements, you have structures that are very much like writing. If you look at a classical narrative and you were to say, there's a beginning, an exposition, there's something that's introduced, a theme of some kind. And then you have development of the theme, you have recapitulation of the theme, you have different minor or major modes of the themes. You have little motifs that appear, that are sprinkled in there. And that is very much, I think, like the structure of a traditional narrative in a novel. These particular chunks, and even the speed of the movements. You have andante, you have rondo, you have legato, you have, something slowing and speeding up. And that this is also very much like a story. You have orchestration where things suddenly become bigger. You have a lot of action going on, and then you have little quiet moments where the melody is very spared, as might be just the piano. And all of that, again, figures into what we do when we're writing. We have to know what these voices are and when they come in, what the turns are in the exposition. So definitely it was ingrained in me. It became, I think, intuition about stories. But I didn't know that at the time.
That is very cool. I had kind of a different question, and it's kind of a big ask. And I'll just ask one more question, and then I'll let some other, because I see people waving. I know they want to get in there.
You
and
want me to play the piano? You want me to go there?
No. I want to. There's this passage. It's on page. I wrote it down. Page 223. It's that. I think I wrote to you about this, and It's the thing about voice. That little interlude called "I am the author of this novel," and
Oh.
and in the introduction you talk about how the different sort of forms that are present in this book. You get the interludes and the quirks, and then there's all the artifacts that are in there. But the interludes are from journal entries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one is so interesting to me because it's such a cool discussion of what is voice, and at the same time, it's clearly fiction. So,
Some people thought it was real.
but
I find that's really strange that I put in some obvious things in there, but people
Right.
thought, oh yeah, yeah. No,
So-
I thank you for recognizing
oh,
it.
well, it's not that subtle, but
Yeah.
I was hoping you could read like the first couple paragraphs of that, and then maybe
Sure.
just talk about voice for a while because it's just such a cool little passage, and I'm really curious to hear what was the context surrounding it. Like, what were you working on? What were you thinking about that you wrote this about voice? And I don't know, whatever you remember about it.
Okay. I am the author of this novel, which is told by a first-person narrator who is not me, as one particular reviewer suggested is the case. For one thing, I am not half Alsatian, half Cherokee. My mother is from Liechtenstein, my father from China, and I have not been married 4 times, only twice. I have sons, not daughters, cats, not dogs, a house on the seaside, not the lakeside, and I do not smoke or take ecstasy. But in a deeper sense, the story itself is me because its circular narrative drive, historical themes, and mythical imagery embody my patterns of thought and my obsessions with the past. But I am not the first-person narrator. I am the author who determined the voice of the narrator, which by extension is the voice of the entire narrative. By voice, I'm not talking about voice quality, melodious, hoarse, foreign accented, so forth. Voice has more to do with the character's subconscious running over her conscious self and her observations as that happens. The narrator unfolds the story naturally and seamlessly. However, to make that appear so, I have to use contrivance in an artful way, which is more difficult than the result would suggest. The voice also has to do with how much she recognizes herself as the story progresses. It is a cliche to have a narrator be completely oblivious to what the plot will turn on. So by voice, I mean more the mind of the character and her identity, how she perceives herself in the world she inhabits, and not what kind of job she has or how much money she makes or whether she is beautiful. Although in the case of this story, physical attributes do form a subtle narrative motif, especially when beauty around her is destroyed by an earthquake, the big one everyone knew was coming but denied, which simultaneously marred her face, left it askew because of plastic surgery with a shaky knife. It takes only a jiggle. Yeah, actually, a lot of that is, I would say, is the way that I think about this difference between the voice of a writer and the voice of a narrator. I often, this is my own definition. People talk about finding your writer's voice, and then they talk about the voice in the story. And I think it's not always clear what we mean by that. And the way that I see it is that when we are finding our voice as writers, what we are trying to do is recognize our intuitions, the way we think, the way we put things together, the way we make sense of the world. And that's going to influence our narrative and what we put in as determinants of what's happening in the story or determinants of character. It is a view that we have, a cosmology of sorts of how this universe happens that we have created. Whereas the voice of the narrator could be saying things that we as, people might say as well, but they are not tied. This narrator is not tied to us. The narrator has a particular voice that has to do with the circumstance that it has found itself in. The character is in a given circumstance, in a given situation, at a point in time and place. And that is very different from who we are as, who I am. I'm just saying this is my philosophy as voice of author, voice of narrator. And it extends into how you look at point of view, for example. So, point of view, whether these things as a writer, as an author, you have this voice that goes on in your head as well. It's these continuous thoughts, and some of them actually contain words. Some of them are just, I don't know how you would characterize thoughts, but they certainly have to do with emotions and memories. So all of that I think figures into my writer's voice.
Did that little piece ever become something more, or that's it?
No, I just wrote that. I don't remember what the reason was that I wrote this. It was in a moment of whimsy, and I did it very quickly. And I think I read it. I finished it, and then I read it at Sagwa, at the Community of Writers. Maybe that's what maybe we were going to talk about voice or something. And then I just wrote this piece, and that's what I read, because I just thought, it's a really serious subject. It's an interesting subject that we all have to think about our entire lives as writers. You don't get to know what that is right from the start. You're figuring it out. I'm always figuring it out. We're figuring out what our intuitions are. But I thought, I'm just going to put this down because it opens up a discussion of what we mean by this, what we mean by truth. No, I'm not. My mother was from Liechtenstein, or the thing about the beauty, and oh yeah, by the way, that actually did happen to me, kind of, that kind of thing. So that's this is the end of it. And I do have to say that this part to me is sort of true in the way that I think about this. So let me rephrase. I am the author of a novel told by a doppelganger in possession of my thoughts, who inserts her subconscious into my subconscious, which is rather like being unaware that someone has deftly slipped her hands into mine. My hands are not the ones tapping the keyboard, although I still believe they are. And these words you are reading are entirely hers, which I still believe are mine.
It's just awesome. I love that. So we've got Carrie's waving her hand, and Luke, are there a bunch of people queued up with questions? Take a few.
Yeah, we have a few. Carrie, go on ahead and go first here, and then we will move into the attendees that are waiting patiently.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. I read your book the minute it came out because I've read all your other books, and I was really struck by the one part where you said that you incorporate your dreams into your writing, and that you even dream about music and lyrics. Can you talk about that?
I have this capacity to, I think we all dream, and we probably all have fragments of many dreams throughout the night, but I've had this ability to remember, if I choose, this ability to remember a lot of my dreams. And it always starts off with the dream that I had just before I woke up. And then if I really focus, I can carry it back to what dream came before it. And the transitions of the dreams are really weird. They're not like a story. Most of the dreams are nonsense. You know, they don't make any, they're not anything you could ever use for a story. But there have been times that I have gone to sleep with a problem in my head about the narrative, and I will actually come up with a possible answer. And I think the reason that happens is that our consciousness is so much looser. It's not as linked to all the stress we have, the anxieties that we won't be able to do this. That even in a very sleepy state, if we were to start writing whatever came to mind, that there would be some surprising things that would emerge. There was a time there a few years ago where I had a complete dream of a narrative, a story. It had the setting. It was a setting I had never thought of. These characters, complications, you know, sort of rivalries in some sense, not the complete ending, but a sense of where it had to go in order to find the ending. And I woke up and I was really excited, but I knew it was probably nonsense. And I wrote it down. I wrote 10 pages as fast as I could. And I looked at it and I read it and it made total sense. And that is the only time where I've had a complete story like that come to me. But I also had a children's story come to me in part. It was Sagwa, the Chinese Siamese cat. And it was a cat that the cats used to dip their tails in the ink and would write these proclamations given to them by their boss, this man, this very mean man. And that this one particular cat who was naughty one day ended up, you know, getting ink all over her paws and writing a different kind of proclamation. So that was a dream as well. I don't know whether that answered your question. There was, the thing about music. Didn't you say something about dreaming music? I have had many dreams about music. And I remember one time it was listening to the symphony in my dream, listening to, it was a Chopin etude. And I woke up singing it. And I thought, I wonder if that is the key. And somebody called me, and it happened to be a friend who's a conductor. And I started singing to him what I just heard. And he said, yeah, that's the key that it's in. And I thought that's amazing. I mean, it goes back to that this song is in my memory. It's, and the way it came out subconsciously or in the consciousness that is dreamland, it remembered it perfectly in the right key. I also have dreams in which I've composed beautiful music. And I can even see the score and all the music, the orchestration, you know, what the cellos are doing and what the horns are doing and everything. It's all there. And when I wake up, of course, it's gone. But there was one time I woke up and I quickly sang the tune, the little tune, and I recorded it. And then later I listened to it. But it didn't sound like something I would have that I would have composed for myself. It was, but who knows where it came from. It sounded like a medieval chant or something, or some kind of religious liturgy kind of song. But to me, it was with this idea that there is something in me. And I had made this goal, a plan that I would one day write a theme, just a very simple theme that would work, and then do variations on the theme, probably just all with one hand, but that theme would become mine. And I would use that theme for music as background. And I could change it in any way I wanted, minor, mode, fast, slow, whatever I wanted to do with it. And all I had to do was find the theme. I just need like 2 measures, 3 measures, and then that would be mine. Are you a musician too?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I, it struck me when I read that, because I have dreamed things that have gone into to poetry and different things. They come through dreams. And when I read that in your book, I was like, oh, cool. That's really cool.
I have a recording of that song. Maybe, I always think I don't want to do anything with it because maybe somebody say, oh, that is so-and-so's really famous tune that you just ripped off. It's probably something somewhere, I'm sure. But in keeping with my pledge never to play in front of somebody, I'm also not going to perform my compositions that I've dreamt. I'm a huge supporter of music. I mean, that's big part of my life. I go to the symphony more often than I do to the movies and jazz concerts and all of that. Lived with a jazz musician for a couple of years. A little boy, actually, he and his family lived with us in New York for a few years. And he's a genius. His name is Joey Alexander, and he is a master jazz pianist. He's nominated for Grammy Awards, has played with Chick Corea, with all the great musicians in the world and every single music festival, including Newport. But he lived with us. And I was very respectful. And when he needed to practice, and he just played improvisationally, completely. I would go into another room because that's what I would have wanted, and or put my headphones on and tell him I have my headphones on. He trusted me though, and he says, "It's okay, Auntie Amy, you can listen." No. I would rather hear it when you are performing it and you feel this is what you want people to hear. Oh.
Alrighty. So moving into our next question, Rosie, you've had your hand raised for a while now, so I'm going to give you permission to talk here, and you can ask your question.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's really great to hear from you. I really love your writing. I recently read The Joy Luck Club, and it just, when I was reading it, I kind of felt like I could relate to a lot of it. My parents immigrated from China, and I grew up here. But kind of along with that, I was wondering, like, how has your Chinese American identity affected your writing, and how is some of the experiences that you've had growing up in America, like, reflected in the Joy Luck Club? And yeah, do you see yourself kind of reflected, especially in June's character?
I think what happens when I'm writing, and I think this might be true for others, is that everything that is part of your identity and that went into your identity coalesces into what you end up writing about, which often has to do with things that stay in your mind that you want to explore. And it's not necessarily at a verbalized level of, I want to talk about, Chinese identity. I think for me, the overall question was, who am I and how did I become this way? What in me was innate, what was shaped, what can be changed? Why do I have the values that I have, the beliefs I have, the leanings? Why do I have these qualities where I, what I feel about things like loyalty and betrayal? So I could go and look at this, I could parse it out and say, this relates to being Chinese, Chinese American, or the child of immigrant parents. But I think that at a certain point in your life, these things are not parsable, that they come with many experiences and they're cumulative. So what I knew about myself and what I questioned about my identity has changed over the years. There were very general questions about my identity when I was growing up, especially in high school, when I blamed a lot of the bad things in my life on the Chinese part of my family. That I had parents who had these expectations, and that's because they were Chinese. Or I didn't get asked out on a date, and that's because I was Chinese. Or so it was unfortunate that I placed all the negatives on the Chinese side of it. The side I thought was not accepted by the dominant society at that time, and therefore was the cause of a lot of my unhappiness. So the answer is not a simple one for me to say, what do I think? I've thought about that question, I would say, from the age of 4, and it's played out. And I say 4 because cousins came over from China, and suddenly I had to speak Chinese to them because they didn't speak English. And I had this distinction between their being Chinese and my being Chinese and also American. But as I said, all of these experiences, each situation feeds into how I thought about myself over time. And I will say one of the big realizations that it wasn't simply that I was writing about being Chinese American. My culture being Chinese American or generations or mother-daughter was not really, it's not my territory. It's not what people think of. People think of me as some kind of subject matter expert on these areas. And I'm just trying to write like the rest of you. If I were Italian American, or if I were, from Iran or something, I would be writing about life. And yes, the references would often relate to the culture, but you're not writing about the culture. And that's the distinction that I make. I would say that what was more relevant was the mother that raised me, and yes, culture was part of that. But what was more significant is that she was a suicidal mother. And that, more than anything, has shaped who I am. Not that I'm suicidal. I became the opposite of that. I rejected any situation that would have made me want to become the way that she was. So if I were to say, look at these questions of what I'm looking at in my fiction, what people see is the cultural side of that, and less so particular circumstances and people in my life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Courtney, I'm going to give you permission here to talk. If you would prefer that I read your questions aloud, just let me know. But Courtney, you are up next. Okay,
She's
so for
muted.
Yep,
She's muted.
here she comes.
Yeah.
Hi, hello. This is
Hi.
Courtney. I really enjoyed everything that you shared, and I appreciate your just being forthright and so forth. You answered some of my questions already, but I wondered who your favorite authors are and what inspires you.
Oh, those are really difficult, evolving questions for me. I would have to say it. One of the writers at the top of my list is Louise Erdrich. And in part, that's because I was very much influenced from her at the beginning. When I read her collection called Love Medicine, I thought, wow, these are amazing. She's an amazing writer, and she has a lot of imagery, and it made me want to write, because I found that the kinds of stories that she told and the beauty of her language, the way she used the language to just draw you in, and that little twists of the story hinged on the very image that she would present. It was so brilliant and seemed so simple in a way. The craft of it made it seem simple. And that's what I want to do. Part of my desire to be a writer was the craft of it. I love the craft. I love to revise. I love playing with words. So she was, and it turned out that that collection was a bunch of short stories about a community. And what I ended up writing about in my first book was short stories. People called it a novel. The reviewers called it a novel, and that's when it became a novel, but they were really a collection of short stories. And by necessity, because I had written these stories about different characters, I could not change, their circumstances were too different for me to merge them and make them one set of mothers, one set of, daughters. They had to be 4 daughters and 4 mothers because of how different they were. But I had a model in a sense, because hers were different voices from this community. Among the others, a writer that I met at the Community of Writers is Richard Ford. He was like a god. The first year that I came to Community of Writers, people would write down every single word he said as gold. One of the things, the comments he made was, and if you seriously want to be a writer, don't have kids and marry someone who can support you. I saw people writing this down. I mean, and Richard would probably say to you, it's true, he's that kind of person. But his prose, his stories, especially there's, I'm trying to remember the name of the collection, but it starts off with this couple in a car and they're escaping, and by the end of it you have the whole situation of what they're in and who these people are and what they're leaving and not quite what they're going to, which is the story. There's a word that I love, and I think the masters of writing have this as their technique. It's called, I just came across Cottywumple. Do you know this word? Cottywumple? Cottywumple? It means that you go deliberately forward to an unknown destination. And that's what I think we do as writers, that we're trying to go deliberately forward, and we don't know what the destination is. Well, Richard, on the very first page, so you read these things and there it is, Cottywumple. And there you go. So what I like about Richard's voice as a writer also is this huge view of American, but also in this internal mind of a person who's commenting on his life, his past, his future, and what's happening in the right in the here and now. And you have to say that not everything that he thinks is great. He's kind of a shitty person oftentimes, and that's okay. That's, I'm saying the character is shitty. Some people might say Richard Ford is shitty too, but the character is not a great character. But the way he lays this out is it seems so simple. There's another writer I really love, and that is Lydia Davis, who I came across her books more recently. Her short stories, a collection of her short stories, and sometimes they're only a paragraph long, and others might be 2 or 3, and they just sort of, it's almost as if this person is just meandering, this discursive style that then you realize she pulls a thread and it's so tight. This whole thing has actually been structured so tightly, but naturally, and it's magic because she finds some little observation that is, slaps you in the face of how true this is. Characters are often quirky. weird. They notice weird things. They're what you would call neurotic, anxious people. But fantastic writer. And it's funny that I'd never really read anything of hers, and she has won all these major, major prizes. The Dublin Award, she's won, I think, National Book Award or Pulitzer. I mean, she's won them all. She's amazing. So I was glad to read her books. I do have to say, some of my favorite writers are not necessarily fiction writers. Well, one other, fiction writer, two others I really love is Jamaica Kincaid, who was also influential when I first started writing. And again, it's a seemingly simple narrative on the surface, but with a lot of tension underneath, a lot of history, tension, emotion, something going on there that is the story, layered with this seeming simplicity. And the way she goes, each sentence builds on something. Oh, we're in this house, but the house my father built, this happened, and this dead person, and it just keeps going in again a kind of discursive way, but it's very tight. So I tend to like those kinds of narratives. I read a lot of nonfiction, and I am somebody who is in love with birds. It's a new infatuation. It started November 3rd in 2016. And there's a reason why it started then. I needed to find beauty in my life. And I started watching birds, and then I started drawing. And there's a wonderful writer who also does journalistic drawings to support his research, and that his name is Bernd Heinrich. One of the books that he wrote is The Mind of a Raven. And he does all his biology, his biologist field work. And this is a guy who climbed 100 feet into a tree to look into a raven's nest. He's now 80. I went to stay with him a year ago in a cabin he built. And this guy is rough. I mean, you talk about off the grid. There's no plumbing, there's no electricity, there's no toilet, there's no, if you want to take a bath, you walk a mile and then you jump into a very cold brook. So that's who this guy is. But his research and the way he writes about this world is just magic. So I like to mix it up. I like to enter different worlds, and it could be through fiction or nonfiction. I think I have all of Bernd's books. So we write to each other on a regular basis, and I accidentally wrote to him a letter that said something about, do you have COVID-19 where you are? Now he's an expert on corvids, and he's raised baby crows and baby ravens and everything. I wrote, and he said, I don't understand your last sentence. Only somebody like this, who's so off the grid, would not know to say she meant to write COVID-19 instead of Corvid-19. He said, and then I told him, what was going on. He said, oh, is that going on outside? And he has no idea. Even today, last week, he wrote a letter and he said, is that Corvid thing, or that COVID, is that pandemic thing, is it still going on? That's how out of touch he is. He's an ultra marathoner as well, but he's a remarkable person.
What was his last name again?
Heinrich.
How do you spell that?
Heinrich. You'd think it would be Heinrich, Heinrich, but he pronounces it Heinrich.
Okay.
So he adopted a German name, but his family is actually from, I think, Poland or something. Originally, they fled, and they were in the forest. They lived in the forest for a long time. Very interesting guy. I'm trying to think of the other books that, oh, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, one of my favorite books is Love in the Time of Cholera. If you read that very first sentence, if you want to know about openings, read the first sentence of that book, and it's just all there, and it goes from there. So, but it's also a beautiful story. So that's one. There's a lot. I just never, when somebody asks me what my favorite books are, I never have a favorite. It often depends on the moment, the situation, and what I happen to be writing about. So.
And that Richard Ford book is Rock Springs, right?
Rock Springs, that is it. Yeah. Do you remember that story, that beginning?
Of course.
Oh, and another that's like that, Annie Proulx. I love Annie Proulx. And Annie Proulx has beginnings like that where they go and they took the wrong turn, then they went here and they took that, you should never go on this highway because blah, 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 and then missed it. And you say, okay, now where is he going? And that's another one, Annie Proulx. Read the beginnings of her books and master at that.
So do we have time for like one or two more questions? I'll leave it to you, Amy, like whenever you want to.
Oh, no, whatever. I know I just yak on, and so people are not able to get very many questions in. That's a trademark of mine.
We're totally into it. It's great.
Awesome. Our next question is going to come from a panelist, Sarah.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Amy. I'm Sarah. I'm a first-year poet. It's really an honor to meet you. I wanted to start off by saying that your piano lessons piece that you opened with, just no pun intended, but really struck a chord with me. I played the piano for 10 years growing up. I remember how much I dreaded my hour-long practices, and that fear of failure and expectation and performance. And Minuet in G minor by Bach is actually the piece that made me quit finally. So yeah, that just really sent chills down my spine. But related to that fear of failure and that expectation, I was wondering, after publishing your first book, and maybe specifically the Joy Luck Club, how your writing process or mentality changed with those added expectations.
I think it's worse, actually. When I wrote the first book, I really didn't think it was going to get published. Maybe if I, was lucky, I might get a story published. It was a collection, but the idea that a whole book of these would get published was fantasy, and I was a very realistic person. I was a business writer. And so I never had those expectations. And when I was published and it took off beyond anybody's expectations, beyond my own editor, publisher's expectations, beyond my husband's expectations, everyone, I didn't know what to do with that. And suddenly I realized that I had been given a whole heap of expectations now for the second book and what I should do and what the hell did I write? And now what did people want out of this? Some people would say magical realism or Chinese culture or generation, and I thought, what did I write? And as I said, and when I read the piece about expectations, that is very, very much true with how I feel about writing today. If I could just go off, I still fantasize about this. No contract, not my name or anything. And I could just write and not have anybody, expect anything. That would be the best thing I could do for my writing. When I think about the expectations, sometimes it stops me. I never want to do another contract, even though I love my editor, and I will work with my editor without a contract. I just don't want a contract. He's the editor of Richard Ford and Joyce Carol Oates and Russell Banks. And met Russell the first year I was at Community of Writers too. So really, really great people, and he's an award-winning poet, Dan Halpern. And even though I love him, I love working with him, I just don't want a contract because I don't want that expectation that I have to fulfill something by a certain time, you know, and so without that, I think I would feel free, and I would be able to write a lot with a great deal more pleasure. It takes me, like when I write, I can really lose myself into it. I'm just writing and writing. But when I come out of it, then I get very anxious that I've got a neurological disease. You know, I can't write anymore. What is it that I once had? And, you know, I can't do it. So I say all these things in part, I can say them openly because I think it's important to let people know who are writers, who are struggling, who are new writers, that this is natural. If you're not working hard, if you're not distressed, maybe you're not working hard enough. Maybe you're not getting deep enough into your story. Maybe you haven't really looked at the craft and being that you've been more critical of what you should do with the craft. Not that you should have anxiety and be paralyzed, but I think that these kinds of feelings, this anxiety that one has over writing is natural and it's expected and it can be good. You gotta work your way out of it. And that's what I have to do with every book. I have to work my way out of that negative place where I think it's an existential angst, which is if I can't write this, if I can't find whatever enabled me to write those other books, my life is over. Who I am as a person is over. You know, that's the level of anxiety that I have, especially before I have to hand a book in.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, so our next question is just kind of going back to your little piece on voice, and just wondering if you could, speak to the development of voice a little bit more, and is there more to it than reading and writing as much as possible, or is there maybe a thought process and some thinking techniques and stuff that you practice as well?
Yeah. And again, what I wanted to distinguish was the writer's voice, who you are as a writer and the kind of stories that you write and why, and then the voice that is in the story, which to me, the voice in the story has some overlap, but a lot of it has to do with craft and what you do with those voices, like point of view. The situation, the story itself is, kind of is determined by the voice. It's a question you might ask the rest of your life as a writer: which determines your story, voice? Does story determine voice, or voice determine story, or to what degree do each of these things influence the other? It's a question I have asked myself since I went to the community of writers in 1985, and I think it's a good one to mull over as you develop your craft and get to recognize who you are as a writer. Now, the voice of the writer, they'll tell you to read other books, you get inspiration, or read their interviews in the Paris Review. And I think all of that is really, really good, especially to get you motivated and excited about writing, and you identify, you say, what that person said is exactly what I'm feeling, especially with interviews. But I think that what needs to happen in terms of the voice of the writer, herself or himself, is that what you're going toward, what you're moving toward, is understanding yourself and especially your intuitions. Once you start to, it's almost that you can't verbalize what the intuitions are exactly. You have to feel them. You know how people say, there's this word is probably overused, the epiphany of a story. You say, oh, there's where I had the epiphany, the recognition, the discovery of something that is the truth. Those are examples of the kinds of things I feel that give you a clue as to what your intuitions are as a writer, which is your voice. What are the kinds of epiphanies that really matter to you in a story? So I don't think there's a lesson plan. I don't think that we can teach it. I think all we can do is to try and help people recognize it, or help yourself to recognize it. And part of that is something my first editor said to me when I was struggling with a story. And she said, it's good writing, it's this and that. She said, but it's just not felt. Okay, that was a big one for me. It's just not felt. So when you want to know your writer's voice, you have to know what it is deep down that is felt, because what is felt, what is emotionally at stake, can drive your story and the kind of stories that you want to take. So you just have to keep working at it. Maybe that's a story that's not felt because it was more, on an intellectual idea that you were working on and haven't gotten to the point yet where it's felt. It's not that you have to have the same situation as those characters, but you're moving toward, say, in a story that had to do with the Civil War, or, being somebody, a young person who wants to be a leader in the civil rights movement. Well, maybe you're too young to have ever been there. It doesn't matter. But what is it that the character in this story, in this situation, what are they going to realize at some point? And usually it's a surprise. It's inevitable, but it's a surprise. You can't contrive it so much that you know exactly, I have to turn here, then I go a third of a mile here, and then I get there. It has to be that cottywumple kind of strategy where you deliberately keep moving forward and you're observing and feeling along the way, and suddenly things make sense and you reach a point where this is the truth that you've seen and this was important to you. It's something that you knew, but you didn't know how to express it. I think one of the reasons why we're writers is that we want to express what we feel, and we have no other way to say it. There's no single word that can say what we really feel. And so we have to find it in a story, in a complete story, and work on it many, many times. It could be hundreds of drafts until this thing emerges. I will say that in the writing of a book, that feeling suddenly that I know what the book is about or what it is that drove me in this book will happen once. So it's not something that happens on a daily basis. You just have to know, you have to feel something of why you want to keep going forward. So that's the felt part. But the really big felt, the payoff, is the most exhilarating thing that I have ever felt, with the exception of something else that's spiritual that we don't need to get into. But this high that makes you, no matter what the difficulty is in writing, that makes you want to do it all over again, because you just can't feel that any other way. Well, I've never done ecstasy, so I don't know if there's a shortcut to that, but it is one of the greatest experiences you can ever have if you're writing and suddenly it's like seeing you. It's you. There it is. It's always been there. There you are. And you love yourself. You love what you discovered on that. You have to love yourself as a writer, I think.
Fantastic. Our next question is, and just considering the different stories that you've read, from kids to nonfiction to fiction, when you are, taking on these different projects, how conscious and aware are you of, the audience and the person that you're writing for? Is that something that is, at the forefront of your mind, or something that is a little bit more in the the background and something that kind of comes naturally as you're going about your writing?
When the thought of somebody else reading this comes to mind, I'm paralyzed. That's the anxiety, the person with the expectations. That's the critic. And all of that really interferes with the writing. So the person I'm writing to is basically my own doppelganger, but it consists also of my mother and the grandmother I never met, because they are the people who know what put me together. And it includes, I have this feeling that there is something genetic that gets passed on from generation to generation, that whatever situation was there that my great grandmother had, that passed it to my that these things come down the line, and those things also made me. So they become, all these different people I've never met are part of who I'm writing to as I sort out in the story what I know and what I want to know. I also think of those people as being shit detectors. So if I write anything that is a little too, easy, that they will, they go, yeah, practice harder, So they're good at, and looking at, you can push yourself, you can be better, aim high, feel deep. And that was a quality, especially in my mother. She felt too much. And that was, I thought, a flaw of hers. And now I realize that she gave it to me, and I only have probably a tenth of what she had in terms of feeling. Of course, it made her suicidal, but she felt deeply. She wanted to know everything about why she felt this way and what could have happened if her mother lived, if her mother hadn't died, and what if she hadn't done this. Everything to her was a concatenation of events that she could possibly have done. If she could have undone this part and that part, her life would have been different. And it's that question that you once asked, if this hadn't happened in my life. And that's when I came to the realization that no, you don't get to choose. It's kind of useless to think you can sort it out, because it's all connected. This concatenation, you just can't pull it out, and then you do, and everything just falls apart and there's nothing left. So, that's, I don't even remember what the question was. That's how cottywomple I am now, but I'm trying to get to some point, but it's this thing about, I know this, the reader. So no, I try to push the reader out of my mind, and the reader that I'm at toward the end of the book, when I really have this existential crisis, is that I know my editor is going to read it. Fortunately, my editor he's just such a kind person. He's a poet. This guy, he's a writer. He's a poet. He starred in the National Poetry Series. He's won awards. And for this last book, Where the Past Begins, it started off being an exchange of emails, and he thought we should do a book on emails, and that would have been so easy to toss off. We just pick some of the 17,000 emails that we've exchanged and just pick the best and put them in. Well, it doesn't work that way. It's so self-indulgent to do that. Although I put some of the emails in there. But then it became a book about writing. And then after that, everything about writing reflects some of what I've been talking about, that it's you, it's yourself, and what made you. So it started veering toward what people call memoir. But he was the one who read them every single week, a new chapter a week, which seems impossible. How can you write a new chapter every week? But that's what I had to do. I imposed that deadline on myself, and it delighted him, but he kept me to it. If I thought I was going to be late, he said, no, you have to turn in a finished chapter tomorrow. So I would do that. So that is an extreme of somebody who was my reader. But even during the writing of that book, I had to believe I was writing it for myself. I was discovering something about my past and who I was. and who my parents were. It was actually very, very private. And when I came out of my office and out of this state of the past, I was often speechless. I just, everything was gone. I was exhausted physically and emotionally. I was shaking sometimes because of what had happened. And that clearly was because I had gone into a place that was strictly me alone. Couldn't have taken anybody else with me there. No.
Thank you, Amy. We have one final question. This one is in regards to meeting President Obama, and curious on how meeting him impacted your life and potentially your writing, and if there are any other important figures that you've met that have had some type of impact like that as well.
Oh, wow. How did you know I met President Obama?
I did not. What the person asking the question did.
Oh, I was first of all, I was very lucky to have been invited to a state dinner. I was actually at the Community of Writers, and I was supposed to go to a board meeting, and I got this letter, and it was like this dinner that was going to take place in three days or something. And I said, oh, it'd be such a hassle to get there, and we'd have to cancel the board meeting. We have to go back and pick up a dress and then fly to, and I was not going to go. And somebody said, are you crazy? Well, one of the reasons I wasn't going to go is I had been to the White House probably 5 times before that during the Clinton years. And so it was not going to be a completely new experience. And I also knew that if they were asking me at the last minute, they probably had some cancellation from somebody and they needed to fill the space. And the guy that was going to be honored was the Prime Minister of Singapore. So they needed an Asian, like, who among the Asians can we get? Oh, how about Amy Tan? So I said, yeah, we're going to get there. We'll be seated in Siberia. And we would have made all this effort. We wouldn't have met anybody except the spouse of some, horrible Republican senator or something, and then somebody convinced us, yeah, we should go. And so we put it all together and we got there and we went. And I remember we were standing in line and we were shaking hands before we went into the dining room. And Michelle Obama shook my hand. She said, oh, I'm so glad that you're here. We can talk a lot more over dinner. And I thought, okay. And then Barack Obama said something similar. And then we went in and were guided, where's our table, and looking at the tables in the back. And they guided us to the head table. And I was seated right across from Barack Obama. And next to me was Gabby Giffords. It was an amazing dinner, but I have to say, unfortunately, I can't say, oh, and he taught me about, justice or about the importance of integrity. I can't say any of that, because when you're starstruck, and there are very few times when I get starstruck, but being in front of Barack Obama, I could barely talk. And then when I did talk, the funny thing is, when you're nervous and you meet somebody famous, you say the most ridiculous things. And I did at one point. He said, I hear you're in a band. And I said, yeah. He said, well, what do you play? And I said, I play the dominatrix. And I thought, I shouldn't have said that to Barack Obama, but he was really fun. And then I said, and I sing this song, Leader of the Pack, you should sing with us because you're the leader. You're the leader of the free world. So you should come and sing with our band. And we ended up talking about books that we read. And I said, well, you wrote a book, and he says, yeah, and the thing is, I don't get enough time to read. And it was just kind of, in one sense, a normal conversation. And another sense, I had this little feedback in my head, is like, you dumbass, why did you say that to the President of the United States? That there was another thing. We ended up talking about raising kids, and I don't have any kids, but I think it was Gabby Giffords or somebody at the table was, how did you raise your kids? And he was, Barack and Michelle were talking about what kind of values and what they do and all this. And I said, I have this friend and he doesn't put any limits or guidance. These kids are screaming all the time. And it was Matt Groening's kids. And Matt Groening, who does The Simpsons. And Matt has had me on The Simpsons. I'm a cartoon character. He's in our band and he's a friend I've known for 30 years. So, and I said to him, you ought to be a character. When you're no longer president, you could be a character in the cartoon series. But he said, so Matt has kids. And the other day I got a text message from him and it was his son screaming, no, Amy, no, Amy. He didn't want Matt to talk to me. And he kept pulling the phone and Matt would be talking. And all of a sudden the phone would be dead because little Matt had pulled the phone. And then Matt would get on again. And it's, no, Amy, no, Amy. And so this happened 3 times. And Barack Obama said, let me see that. So I had to hand my phone over to him and, find the video and show him the text messages. He's just watching this and laughing. So that's kind of what happened as well. So there were no lessons, no deep lessons of much. We just had a really good time having dinner. Yeah. I'll say one of the great people that I met that I consider almost more starstruck. It was Sonia Sotomayor, because she's a woman of color and she invited Lou and me to have lunch in her private chambers, just the 2 of us. And she'd gone as far as to know what my diet was and prepared food that was specifically for this diet. And she didn't eat because she has her own diet. She's got diabetes. But it was an hour of just talking about family and about kids and about growing up with a mother from a different country. And, just kindness. We made an agreement, Lou and I made agreement with ourselves that we would not bring up any of the Supreme Court cases that she would be hearing in the next week. It was just about starting where they were going to start these sessions. And one of them had to do with gay marriage. One of the clerks she had was a nephew of mine. And I wasn't about to say, please do this or that with these cases coming up. But she said to me, oh, yes, TJ and Andrew, they need to have kids soon. I'm really worried about them. They should start raising a family now. And so then I had my answer of who she was as an individual. On the other hand, she voted against that measure. I think she voted against it. But the reason was she didn't think this was a decision that should be made at a state level. She wanted it to be at a federal level for this to happen. And so there's, a strategic way that this was being done that was very different from how she personally felt about that. And so I really admired her, even though she might have drawn a lot of flack from people for voting that way. I'm trying to think of all these influential people, and I don't think it has to do with fame as much as, something deeply personal. And right there, I would just say my mother, she was a flawed person. She was suicidal. I hated her at times in my life, but she, to a very great degree, made me who I am by the things that I rejected and the things that were inculcated without my wanting it to be so, and the things that I took. So I would say, if I had to choose the most influential person, it definitely was my mother.
Thank you so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, break out the wine. Let's go.
Well, this has been just so terrific. I don't know how to thank you enough for being here and hanging out for so long.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes, so much to think about. I mean, so much wisdom, so many things to think about. Really, really great. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. We can clap again. Not going to do it justice.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and for
Yeah,
listening and everything. So, yeah. And then one day we're gonna get back to the community of
Oh,
writers.
I sure hope
Yay.
so. I sure hope so.
I
And
know.
I'm gonna put.
Oh, you're silenced. You're muted.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm trying to put the link in there for people who, if I'm supposed to say, if you like this event and you want to support the EW MFA program, go to this link and, oh, Lisa put it in there too. So thank you.
And then, Amy, we were talking about the fact that your movie's coming out for a Sundance premiere. How do people find that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not a movie that I made. It's a movie. I'm the subject of a documentary made by a wonderful director named Jamie Redford, who finished this film in October and died after he finished it. It will premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on February 2nd. It plays February 2nd and 3rd, but the premiere itself is, I think, February 2nd at 3. If you go to the website, Sundance Film Festival, then you'll see all the different films that are offered. I think if you choose just one film, it's $12 or $15. You can get a whole package where you can see as many of these films as you want for, I don't know, $350 or something like that. There are a lot of free panels. I will be on a couple of panels, at least a couple, maybe more. Panels on the film, on Asian Americans and things like that. And so those are free. And if you go to the website or the particular film, it's called Amy Tan Unintended Memoir. And if you go there, it'll have a link, and then you can see, it'll link to a number of things, but also to these free panels that are going on. There's another thing that's coming out. It's funny. I never thought that I would teach. And I haven't taught in any regular form. And in part, it was because to teach, you're required to drive and be somewhere. And I can't drive. And the whole idea that I'd have to regularly. So that was one thing. And also I got published before I was able to go to these MFA programs that I had planned to. And I'm not schooled in any formal way. The schooling that or the knowledge that I got in a more formalized way was through the community of writers. But I wasn't teaching. And, but I ended up teaching a class, and it's a master class. I don't know if you've heard of this company, Masterclass, but they have a number of people who teach, like Annie Leibovitz teaches on photography, and somebody teaches on gardening, or somebody on fashion. RuPaul teaches something. I can't remember what it was, but so this master class, they came and they asked if I would teach a class on writing, and I said no, I am not a teacher. But then they came back again, and I thought, well, I wonder, and they explained to me what they were interested in. They read everything I'd ever written. They'd seen all these interviews, and they started talking about what they would be interested in. I thought, well, I could probably do that. And here we are, we're stuck. I don't have anything else to do. So I ended up doing this class with them, and that'll come out, I think, in March. it was actually a great experience. They are so professional. It's done just like a movie. The set for this is bigger than this room, and the actual facility was gigantic. It was like a football field, with all of the people came out of the film industry. The interviewers were so professional, and all the curriculum, they put together a proposed curriculum, and then I got to change everything. And then we went through it a couple of times, and now I'll get to see the finished thing, or the, before the finish, and then I get to comment on it. And so that'll be it's about a little under 4 hours, and it covers many different topics. Yeah, so I actually can say I taught something. The other ones, it's actually, I think, a pretty good deal. It's under $200 for a year, and what you get are all the classes. So you can there's class by Joyce Carol Oates, Margaret Atwood, Walter Mosley, who else? Salman Rushdie is the newest one, Judy Blume. So in the fiction world, there's those people, Neil Gaiman. And then there's one on gardening. I want to look at the one on gardening. It's like how not to kill plants. I need that one. If they had one on nature, I would love that. They have ones on interior design, on cooking, and leadership, running a business. I think Anna Winter is what has a topic there. I think it must be like how to intimidate your employees or something. Anyway, I don't get any, kickbacks for selling their product, but I think it's a pretty good deal. Once I got into it, took a look at what they were doing, I thought, well, it's not bad. If you don't like this course, you can always go that one. And I think it would be great to be able to see what each of these writers say about writing. And I'm sure that it would be different, that you could give every one of them this question, what's voice? And they will come up with something different.
That really does sound good. And I'm sure that your course is excellent. You call yourself unschooled, but I don't know. I'm just not convinced.
that unschooled. Well, I've done a lot of existential angsty. So that's my school.
Well, and you've written an awful lot, and yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. And
thank you. Thanks for listening. So,
yeah, I can't thank you enough.
Okay.
Really
All
wonderful.
right. We'll play more ukulele.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for coming.
Okay. Thanks all for coming. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.